because now we come to the first sharing session of today that is focused on the toolkit or toolkits that have been developed throughout this SMaRT-EU project. But let me first warmly introduce to you our first speaker, that is Anna Philippa Oliveira. Anna is a PhD student in the Communication Studies doctoral program at the Social Science Institute of University of Minho. She conducted research focused on creative media production in formal education settings and the promotion of media literacy and citizenship in schools with a grant from the Portuguese Foundation for Science and Technology, FCT. Anna, I'll give the floor to you, and I'm very curious to hear more about the tools for social media resilience.
So as Joyce mentioned, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the tools for social media resilience, which is O1, the first output of the project. The SMaRT-EU platform, it was created with the intention of being a resource accessible to a broad audience that would not only store the results from the research that we conducted, but also to provide information and resources that could be used daily in a variety of settings. Keeping this in mind, we created a website that would be the showcase and main point of access to information about the project, be user-friendly and easy to navigate, and be an interactive space where, besides searching and accessing information and materials, the user could engage in learning activities, as it happens with our Be-Learning course. Besides this, we aim to enable users to contribute with their knowledge and their own resources, as also Maria José has stated before, and also to be a showcase of other international projects related to the themes of media literacy, online civic engagement, and disinformation. And let me already invite you all to visit the project's website if you haven't already done that. One of the main parts of the SMaRT-EU's website is the guide on disinformation and social media, and this will be the main focus of my presentation. So one of the tasks of the project that the project comprised was the collection and creation of online materials and interactive tools to improve the capacities of citizens in order to acquire a critical understanding of the media and to interact with it in an informed process in social networks. This is how the guide on disinformation and social media came about. And beside the literature review, the repository, the guide also includes the new materials created under the project, as you can see in this still that I'm presenting you here. So starting with the repository, it includes information about and related to the end users groups defined in the scope of the project. So young people, educators, older people, and also intergenerational approaches. To create the repository, the team took into account several aspects. The materials were selected through an interpretative literature review, taking into account the three main subjects, and using a two-step complementary approach. First, and given the team's expertise, we selected the most relevant studies in the field, and then we made a literature review in the most well-known search engines and platforms such as Google Academic, Beyond, National Repositories, Sage, and Francis, and so on. All contents were organized according to the three main subjects and to the four types of end users identified. So the contents were organized according to media literacy key concepts, online civic engagement, resilience to disinformation and fake news, and in regard to the four types of end users, young people, educators, older people, and intergenerational groups. Also, the team collected contents from various languages, and this was a preoccupation that we had throughout all projects. The aim of this organization has been to provide a literature review that would be easily searchable and readable by a wide audience. So we wanted to develop a project that would reach not only the academic community, but that would result in contents that a broad audience could access and read and use in their daily lives. Besides this, the repository is available in the form of a downloadable spreadsheet and is open to everybody's contributions, also as Maria José already stated. And this is a challenge that we have been launching and reinforcing through the project's various communication channels. So we have been sending newsletters to our subscribers and also talking about this on social media. So this is a project that is open to contributions of the community. As you can see in this example, once you enter each end user group page, you'll find a short text about the group and how in the scope of the project, this group is understood. All references are clickable so that visitors can read further, and we aimed as much as possible to write everything in a language that would be accessible to a broad audience. Below, as you can see here, you have access to a timeline with a selection of contents related to each main theme. So as I have stated before, media literacy, online civic engagement, and resilience to disinformation and fake news. We also found it important to create short introductory texts about each one of these subjects. And at the bottom of each page, here, the user has access to the spreadsheet version, here, to the new materials that were created during this long year, and also to the link where contributions are welcome. So we created a Google form, and everybody can easily insert their suggestions and materials that can be used and inserted in our repository. This is a preview of the spreadsheet version. You can filter it by subject, by type of resource, by language, and you have access to each hyperlink to see the full resource. And by organizing the spreadsheet in these columns, it is possible to simplify the navigation and to access to specific materials. So even though the repository is big, we tried as much as possible to provide an easy navigation experience so that everybody can use this repository in a daily basis if necessary. Then the guide on disinformation and social media also contains the new materials that were created by the SMaRT-EU team. These materials were created with the intention of both being used during the project activities and also in other contexts. And during this year, a variety of materials was created. So we created leaflets, booklets, interactive resources, interviews, teasers, YouTube news. All materials were created with the aim of being used by all end users groups. The materials are about disinformation, fact-checking, media literacy, online civic engagement, and other subjects, and they can be used in different educational contexts. These are some examples of the materials that were created during this year. So this is an example of a YouTube news, an interview, a teaser, a leaflet, an interactive resource, and a booklet. The leaflets and the booklets, we tried as much as possible to make them to make online versions and also printable versions if you prefer to use paper, as I do. Most of the materials are available in 2 languages, in English and 1 national language, with the aim of being disseminated and used in national contexts, particularly in the activities that we conducted during the project. As to the video contents, some of them are also available in 2 languages, and the others have automatic subtitles, so everybody can have a clear understanding of what the interviews are about. Another thing that we decided to create was a custom search bar. And this bar allows to do a specific search within the results that come from our tried and tested repository of resources. So by writing specific terms, visitors can find media literacy resources for young people or older people, educators, and intergenerational purposes. And so this was another strategy that we thought would work to provide a pleasant navigation experience in the platform. In terms of results, we can highlight a set of data. So until now, the website has received about 3,500 total visits, and around 30% of our visitors are returning visitors, and about 69% of them are new visitors, and we are very glad about these results. And we have received visitors from Portugal, the UK, Belgium, Austria, United States, Croatia, Netherlands, Spain, Finland, France, and India, and so on. And so it's good to see that the project has reached a wide audience, as it was its aim. Our contents are accessible in all devices. I haven't said that to you, and this was one of the main concerns during the creation of the platform. The new material, and we also believe that is allowed that the new materials were used during the participatory workshops conducted during the project, and also in other training activities conducted in non-formal settings. The materials available on YouTube were viewed more than 2,000 times, and we received contributions to the repository, mainly from Portugal, Spain, and Netherlands. And we hope that after today's conference, we are going to receive more contributions from other countries of the world. I'd like to leave a final note. We are still receiving contributions to the SMaRT-EU repository, so I'd like to invite all of you to share with us your materials and suggestions of content that could be included in the project's repository. SMaRT-EU will remain a project open to the community, and so everybody is welcome to participate and to invite to enrich these tools for social media resilience. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope all of you enjoy our final conference.
Well, I want to thank you, Anna, for your presentation. And I suggest that we go on to the second speaker of today. Our second speaker with regard to the toolkit is Alenka Leconte. Alenka is a digital inclusion expert of Mediawijs, the Flemish Knowledge Center for Digital and Media Literacy. She coordinates several cooperation platforms for digital inclusion in Flanders, Belgium, supporting, informing, training, and bringing together actors that work with vulnerable groups is at the core of her activities. Alenka, we are very curious to learn more about the B-Learning course on social media resilience. Het is aan jou om te starten. Veel succes.
Thank you very much, Joyce, for the introduction. Let me just start by sharing my presentation. Before I dive into the heart of my presentation, the B-Learning course, I first wanted to especially thank the coordinators of the SMaRT-EU project. I really think that our Portuguese colleagues did a really, really wonderful job in bringing all the partners together and making sure that we created really great output. So I really wanted to give a warm thank you for that, especially during the COVID times. And as Maria José said, even without us ever meeting face to face. So even in difficult circumstances, I really think that the coordination for the project was really great. But I'm here today to talk to you all about the B-Learning course that we developed for the SMaRT-EU project. As Joyce said, my name is Alenka Leconte. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, as Joyce said. But if afterwards you have any further questions about the B-Learning course or something else, you can find my email in the slides. I work for Mediawijs, which is the Flemish Knowledge Center for Digital and Media Literacy. That means that we're mainly active in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. And we provide support to actors on the field by providing training, information, different tools, network opportunities, etc. But of course, I'm not here today to talk about Mediawijs, but I'm here to talk to you about the B-Learning course, which is one of the outcomes of this project. What is this B-learning course, and what are the objectives of the B-learning course? Well, the objective is to provide a short, so it doesn't take very much time to go through the B-learning course, but focused online training for educators. In the B-learning course, you can find information, exercises, and discussion activities. So each chapter, I will dive into the content in a few minutes, but each chapter is built in the same way. So that means that first you get a video where we explain some theoretical concepts. Then you get some interactive exercises. You get a discussion activity that you can do with your target group. And then you can find some extra in-depth materials. So the video explaining the theoretical concepts is in English with a possibility of Dutch subtitles, and the in-depth materials, as Anna already mentioned, we really try to pay a lot of attention that we would include materials and information in the partner languages as well. So the in-depth materials, you can find materials in Portuguese, in Dutch, in Estonian, etc. Who are we targeting with this B-learning course? So we target both, we target educators and other people who work with older people, with youth and young people, or who work with a combination of groups and work in an intergenerational way. So what do we talk about in this B-learning course? No big surprise. Of course, we talk about disinformation and fake news, but we also talk about the role of social media in the spread of disinformation and fake news. We also pay attention to how you can address these topics with the groups you work with, because it's not enough to know the theoretical frames and concepts of these topics, but you also need some guidance on how to address these topics, because often we notice that it can be a touchy subject. We also discuss our own responsibility when we're being active online, when we're posting and reacting, and we also pay attention to fact checking. So the B-learning course consists of 5 chapters. In a few minutes, I will talk a bit about each and every one of those chapters. Of course, we start with an introduction, then we go to what is fake news and why do people believe it? What's the role of social media, different approaches for different groups, and our own power and responsibility. Let's start with the introduction, which is, of course, the shortest and maybe the most straightforward of all 5 chapters. It gives some general information on the topics covered during the course. We start with some triggering questions. We try to motivate the participants to actually go through the entire course and try not to stop at the introduction. So we try to trigger them with some questions like, what is fake news and disinformation? What is the impact? Do you know how to address these topics with the public you work with, etc. Of course, we also provide some information on the partners of the project and on how the course is structured and how you can use it. Then we dive into the first thematic chapter of the course, which is what is fake news and why do people believe it? For the first part of this chapter, we talk about, what is disinformation and fake news? And we try to not spend too much time on trying to define it, but we actually try to spend more time on, well, if you ask people in the streets about disinformation and fake news, what do they believe is disinformation and fake news? So what do they consider to be fake news? So that means that we talk about a very broad, or we use a very broad scope. It means that we also discuss scams and phishing, bad journalism, etc. So we do not limit ourselves to a too narrow view of disinformation and fake news. We also try to provide some context and some history. So we explain that that this isn't a new phenomenon. So in the past decades, we have seen disinformation and fake news, and we talk about the ways in which people access information. And then we put an emphasis on what is new is the huge scale and speed with which disinformation and fake news are being produced and spread. Once we have explained what we consider to be fake news, then we go to another very important part of this, which is, well, why do people actually believe fake news? So then we talk about things like a confirmation bias, for example. And then lastly, we end the theoretical frame with, well, why does all of this matter actually? Why should we be talking about these topics? In which we state that that if we consider trustworthy information and a good press to be a cornerstone of our democratic societies, then of course we need to be discussing these topics. In this chapter, we also added some exercises on how to recognize fake news. There's a discussion activity on exploring the term fake news with the target audience. And as always, there's also some extra resources in the partner languages for more in-depth learning. Then we switch to the next chapter where we discuss the role of social media. Where we really discuss, well, how does social media come into play, and why is it important that we address social media? First, we start at the beginning. We start by thinking about how people access information and how this has changed over the years. So we start by inviting people to think about how people accessed information some years ago, where you had radio channels, television channels, newspapers. So you had a relatively limited amount of channels where you could access information. And those channels had more or less the same information sources. Whereas today, there are so many options to access information, and there's a wider variety of opinions out there that we can easily access. So then we dive into these new information channels, and we talk about social media, where we emphasize or we explain that that social media are businesses, and so we invite people to think about the business model behind these social media platforms. So we talk about advertisements, we talk about how social media channels can make more money if people spend more time on their platform, which leads us to algorithms, and algorithms trying to predict what kind of content you want to see so that you would spend more time on their platforms, which leads us to concepts like filter bubbles. Here as well, you get a discussion activity and a tryout for algorithms so that people can actually have a go at it and see how these algorithms actually work. And then again, you get some extra resources for more in-depth learning. Then once we've talked about some of these theoretical concepts in the last two previous chapters, we wanted to spend enough time and attention on, okay, now that I have this knowledge in my head, how do I talk about these topics with the groups I work with, or how do I talk about these topics in a family context? So in this chapter, we really spend time on how to discuss these topics. And first of all, we try to reassure people that this is not an easy task. And we just try to give some principles to keep in mind while addressing these topics. So we put a lot of emphasis on being respectful, on listening, on having a questioning approach, especially as an educator. So, for example, if someone from the audience you work with talks to you about some fake news item, to not have an instinct by saying, oh, but this is ridiculous, this cannot be true, but have an approach of, oh, that's interesting, where did you read this, or what are the sources of this article, etc., to really have this respectful approach. Here we could very thankfully use the results from other intergenerational activities we had during the SMaRT-EU project that my colleagues will talk about more in depth later. There's also a discussion activity on how different target groups access information, which is also something we talk about in the theoretical framework. And then you get some extra resources for more in-depth learning. Then the last chapter, we really wanted to talk about our own power and responsibility. So what can we do as an individual about disinformation and fake news to avoid having an approach where, oh, I'll just sit back because there's nothing I can do about this. It's these big social media platforms that have all the power, which is, of course, in some part true, but we really wanted to focus on what you can do yourself as an individual and an organization. So the first part of this chapter is about how you can do your own fact checking. So we provide a series of questions that you can use to try to figure out if the information you see before you, if it is true or not. And we also emphasize that because of a huge amount of information that we need to process, that there's also fact-checking websites that can do this for us. So we also provide a list with some European and local fact-checking websites that are trustworthy. And then in the second part of this chapter, we really talk about what the consequences are of your actions online. For example, if you see a social media post and you're convinced that it's fake news, well, what's the best action that you can take as an individual? Is it replying to the posts, saying that it is fake news for these reasons? Or is it reporting the post to the social media platform? Is it ignoring the post and making your own post about the same topic, but with the correct information? So we talk about a few of the different possibilities and the consequences, because we noticed that a lot of people don't necessarily realize that if you, for example, react to a fake news post, in some way you're reinforcing it because there's more interaction on the post, and so it will become more popular, and so the social media platform will show it more, which quite often is exactly the opposite of what you're trying to reach. So we put in a discussion activity on how your target groups can react to fake news. And here as well, of course, there are some extra resources for more in-depth learning. That's about it for the Be Learning course. We really try to make a relatively short and comprehensible course with some very practical tools. The course is free for all, so it's free to access, and it's available on the website that, of course, we have mentioned a few times already, but is here on the slides as well.